I'm in my container host. Let's start PowerShell as an administrator. For some of the Docker commands, you need to run PowerShell as an administrator. Let's do a bit of cleanup here in the screen and then explore a very basic command called Docker image. If you typed only the Docker image without certain parameters, it will give you the help file for that command. If you want to explore different commands available under Docker, you can type docker --help. That will give you the list of commands available for you. So in this case, you can see that there are different commands like docker run, docker pull, docker images, and the options available for different commands. For example, if you want to get help for docker pull, you can type docker pull --help, which will give you how to complete that command. A very common image that is frequently used in Windows space is called Microsoft Windows Server Core image. To get that image into your local machine, you can type docker pull and you can give the full name of that image. The name of the image is Microsoft Windows Server Core. So you need to type docker pull Microsoft Windows Server Core. Make sure that you type all the words right. By default, if you don't specify a tag, it's going to pull the latest version. You can find certain existing layers are not downloaded. So only Delta changes are being downloaded. All layers comes in compressed format. So after this download is completed, it's going to extract those layers. So the download is completed. If you type docker images, you can find the image we just downloaded, Microsoft Windows Server Core latest image. The size is about 10.5 gigabyte. So you will ask, in this case, I downloaded Microsoft Windows Server Core latest tag. How do I know what images are available from Microsoft? So there are different images Microsoft publish. And if you ask, how does Docker know where to look for these images, from which repository that Docker took these images, you can find it out easily by typing docker info. This will give you certain metadata that Docker used to connect into this repository. For example, under the registry tag, you can find that it's looking for these images under this repository. If you want Docker to use a private repository that you use, you can easily configure Docker to do so. If you go to Docker Hub, here you can find like most of the images that Microsoft has published. For example, if I go and then search something like Microsoft, you can find that different images Microsoft has published. You have images for .NET Core. In this case, this is something that has .NET Framework already installed. And if you go to that image and click the tag, you can find like different tags that Microsoft has attached for this image. So for example, when they release a new security patch or different version of .NET Framework, they will give a different tag for that image. There are a lot of other images that Microsoft publish. For example, certain images with ASP.NET already installed, with IIS running. You can easily find them using Docker Hub repository. So in this case, if you go into Microsoft ASP.NET, where you have IIS already installed, you can find Microsoft has published different versions. So let's clear this window. If I type docker pull Microsoft ASP.NET, it will pull the latest Microsoft ASP.NET image. I already had that, so it's not going to download anything. If you want to download a specific tag or a version, you can explore what are the tags available. So I have one called 4.6.2. So what I can tell is docker pull Microsoft ASP.NET, and then you give the tag, in this case, the version 4.6.2. So it's going to go there and then download this specific version of ASP.NET. So if this specific version already depends on certain layers and those layers exist, it's not going to download them. So certain layers didn't exist, so it's going to download those layers, extract them, and soon your image will be ready. If I type Docker images, you will find that Microsoft ASP.NET 4.6.2 is downloaded. Along with that, you have the latest version also. So you can maintain multiple versions of Docker images in the same host. I can give it a different name for this. For example, I can say Docker tag Microsoft ASP.NET 4.6.2. Instead of saying that, I want to give a name like my company, my image, let's say old version. So you can rename images in the way that you like. So if I type Docker images now, you will find that along with the same ASP.NET 4.6.2, you have another my company, my image, all version that points to the same image ID. So it's like an alias. Let's now type Docker remove image to remove an image. And let's say we remove Microsoft ASP.NET version 4.6.2. What will happen is it will realize that certain layers are referred by another tag, my company, my image, all version. So it's not going to remove the layers that ASP.NET 4.6.2 is using. So if you type Docker images, of course, you can find that the 4.6.2 alias is removed, but the image itself is not completely removed. To remove the image, you need to remove all the tags that are referring to that. So if I type Docker remove image, my company, my image, all version, what will happen is Docker will realize that there's no any tags referring to this image ID, and then it will go there and then completely delete those layers that are no longer necessary. So you can find that layers that are no longer needed are now completely removed because there's no any alias or tag referring to those layers. So if I type Docker info, you will find that there's a one called Docker root directory that points you to C program Docker. So this is where the Docker images are kept. So you may be wondering like what happens to these images that are being downloaded. So the images that are being downloaded will be kept in this folder unless you of course configure it differently. And there's a folder called images, and that's where these images, once they are downloaded, are kept. So you need to leave enough room in this folder to get new images. So for example, if I type Docker images, you can find that I have an image called Windows Server Core. So if I type Docker image help, you'll find there are some other subcommands that I execute on top of images. So if I type Docker image and then type history, and I want to get the history of Microsoft, let's say ASP.NET, you will find that the commands that are being executed to create this image. So initially it is based out of this version of image, and the person who created this executed certain commands and PowerShell commands to create this image. So for example, this could be installing IIS, installing some patches. If you want to get into details around how the image is composed, you can type Docker image inspect and then type the image name. And here you will find certain metadata about the image, things like what's the image tag, what's the default program that it runs. For example, you can define environment variables when this image is running. If you look at this entry point, it says what's the default command it's going to run. So because this is IIS based image, it's going to run IIS, of course. So here you can find the entry point, and here we are running the famous IIS process. And also, if you go down, you will also find a section called layers. So Docker images are organized into layers. So one layer can depend on another layer. And what I'm going to do is to showcase you how these layers are organized in Windows. So if I copy one of these layer ID and then go to this special folder that I just opened, and then search for that layer ID, you will find that there's a file under that layer ID. And this file will give you the location. If you open its location and open it using Notepad, that file will point into another file. So here you can find that there's an ID. So if I copy that ID this file is pointing to and then search that file name again, you will find there's another file with that ID. So let's open that file location. So that's how the layers are organized. So there's one layer that depends on another layer, and those layers are defined in files that I just showcased you. A very common image that we used before is called Microsoft Windows Server Core. But the size of the image is about 13 gig, and ASP.NET is about 13 gig, and the Windows Server Core image is about 10 gig. If you are playing around with image and you want to explore a different image manipulation command, another common image that you can use is Microsoft Nano Server. Windows Server Core image is large, but the Nano Server image is very small. It doesn't have all the features of Windows Server Core image. So if you are going to run any application on that, you of course need to go there and then install a lot of software on top of it to make it useful. But if you want to create very small images, that's a really good candidate to start with. So if you have a large server cluster and you want to save some space and you want to increase the packing density of application, Windows Nano Server is a good candidate to start with. Of course, you will end up installing a lot of software, but you will get a very bare minimum image to save some space and to make containers very efficient when they start. So the download is completed. If you type Docker images, you will find the size is about 1.1 gig for that Windows Nano Server. So when you are executing these labs, you can use this Nano Server image to play around and then learn different Docker image related commands.